Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to dig into the recent Canadian election.
Yes, specifically looking at it through the eyes of, well, two quite distinct YouTube commentators, Paul Joseph Watson and Nuxenor.
Exactly. We've watched their analyses, and they are definitely opinion pieces, let's be clear.
Oh, absolutely. These aren't neutral news reports by any stretch.
Right. So our aim here isn't to say they're right or wrong, but more to unpack their arguments. What are they actually saying?
What are the main themes? What are the big concerns they're voicing about the election and maybe Canada's direction overall? Might be some surprising takes in there.
Okay, so let's kick things off with the main result. Carney, the left-leaning candidate, won against Pierre Poilievre on the right.
And straight away, both Watson and Nuxenor seemed, well, maybe not shocked, but certainly not pleased, expressing surprise, maybe dissatisfaction.
Yeah, and Nuxenor jumped on a couple of things almost immediately, didn't he?
He did. He mentioned the election website apparently going down for a bit during the count. He flagged it, race suspicion maybe. Didn't outright say fraud, but...
Planted a seed.
Kind of. And he also pointed out that President Biden's congratulations tweet to Carney came, well, unusually late in his view.
Interesting details they chose to highlight. Creates a certain mood, doesn't it?
It does. But where they really seem to overlap, and this is pretty central to their whole analysis, is looking at who voted and why, specifically Canadian boomers.
Right. This was a big focus. Paul Joseph Watson. He used a graph apparently showing boomers prioritizing, hating Donald Trump.
Yeah, putting that above things like, the cost of living or finding affordable housing.
Yeah.
Which he then contrasts with younger Canadians who are probably more worried about jobs and, housing.
Now, obviously, we haven't seen the graph itself, its source or anything, so we can't verify that's claim.
True. But the general idea that a strong anti-Trump feeling drove boomer votes, that's definitely a narrative you hear in some corners online.
And Nuxenor really leaned into this, too. He basically argued that for a lot of boomers, stopping Trump, or their idea of Trump, was the number one thing.
Even if it meant, in his view, voting for a party that's overseen economic problems or other issues he disliked.
Did he give any numbers on that?
He mentioned a statistic, yeah. Something about a large chunk of boomers saying dealing with Donald Trump was key to their vote, which, he argues, is totally different from younger groups who are apparently focused squarely on the cost of living.
Okay, so the narrative from both is this generational split heavily influenced by Trump.
Pretty much. And they both suggest this boomer focus is kind of amplified by legacy media. Their take is that older Canadians get their news there, and that news paints Trump overwhelmingly negative.
So the argument goes they're influenced by that narrative, maybe more than the domestic issues affecting their kids or grandkids?
That seems to be the implication they're making, yes, that this external figure overshadowed immediate national concerns for that group.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Another major theme for both of them, immigration.
Oh, yeah. Big concerns voiced there. High levels of immigration. That was definitely a point they both hammered home.
How did they frame it? Was it just about numbers?
Well, numbers were part of it. Paul Joseph Watson mentioned a, quote, threefold increase in the migration of Indians to Canada since 2020. Talked about approaching a vermilion mark, whatever that means exactly.
He showed a picture of Toronto, didn't he? As an example of demographic shifts.
He did. And cited some figures suggesting migrants make up 30-45% of the population now, and projected that Native Canadians could be a minority by 2041.
Wow. Okay, those are some stark figures he's putting out there.
Yeah.
Important to remember, demographic projections can vary a lot, though.
Absolutely. Models and data matter. But it clearly shows his anxiety about Canada's future demographic makeup.
And Nuxenor, did he focus on demographics, too?
Less on demographics, more on the economics of it. He had this housing market pyramid scheme theory.
A pyramid scheme? How did that work?
His argument was basically increased immigration leads to more demand for housing.
Right.
Which then needs more immigrants to come in and build those houses.
Ah, okay. Which then increases demand again.
Exactly. Creating this cycle that just keeps pushing housing prices up, making it totally unaffordable, especially for younger Canadians.
But that's quite a theory. It definitely highlights a worry about sustainability and affordability.
Yeah, it's a forceful analogy. And Watson also quoted, someone didn't say who, describing current migration levels as vastly too high pre-pandemic levels. So the feeling is that policy hasn't caught up with reality.
Right. And this ties into their broader points about the economy and cost of living, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They both paint a pretty bleak picture of Canada's economy under the previous government, under Trudeau.
And the implication is that Carney winning means more of the same.
That seems to be their reading, yes.
Yeah.
Nuxenor specifically used another graph, apparently showing Canada's per capita economic growth being really low compared to other developed countries over the past.
Again, we'd need to see the graph's data source.
Of course, but it serves his argument that the economic track record hasn't been good.
And he connects this back to the boomer vote, too, right?
He does. He emphasizes that boomers, many already own homes. They're maybe more financially secure.
So they could afford to vote based on Trump feelings rather than the cost of living.
That's his argument, that they prioritized the anti-Trump sentiment over economic issues that hit younger people much harder. It's this narrative of a generational divide in what matters at the ballot box.
Which suggests, according to them, that the election outcome maybe doesn't reflect the most pressing economic needs of a large part of the population.
That's certainly the conclusion they seem to draw, that the boomer voting bloc, driven by maybe different priorities, skewed the result away from addressing those younger generation concerns.
Okay, there's another big topic they both touched on, using that term, wokeness, and the general political climate.
Yeah, they didn't hold back here. Paul Joseph Watson was very direct. He called the last decade under Trudeau unadulterated woke madness.
Strong language. What examples did he?
He mentioned things like nightmare lockdowns, mask mandates, and mandatory vaxes. Pretty standard criticisms from that perspective. And he also brought up Trudeau having a child who uses they-them pronouns.
So using wokeness as a sort of catch-all for progressive policies and social attitudes he dislikes.
Seems like it. It's a term that gets used in many ways, but in his context, it's clearly meant negatively, covering a whole range of things.
And Nuxinor.
Similar sentiment, maybe a bit more sarcastic. He commented on Canada staying woke despite the election, also referencing Carney's child and their pronouns.
And Watson connected this back to the boomers again.
Yeah, he pointed out what he sees as a contradiction. Like, if boomers supposedly didn't like these woke policies.
Why vote for the same party?
Exactly. Which, for him, just reinforces his main point. The anti-Trump feeling must have been the real driver, overriding everything else.
Interesting logic trail there. Okay, one last thing before we wrap up. They both mentioned Ground News.
They did, yeah. Both plugged it as a sponsor, presented it as a way for viewers to get news from, different sides of the political spectrum.
A tool to see past alleged media bias.
Pretty much. It fits into their general skepticism of mainstream media narratives, especially around Trump and Canadian politics. Using Ground News is positioned as a way to get a, quote, fuller picture.
Right. Okay, so let's try and summarize the main arguments we pulled from these.
Okay. So a huge one was the focus on boomer voters, driven primarily by anti-Trump sentiment, potentially overlooking domestic issues like the economy.
Then there were the significant concerns about high immigration levels linked to demographics by one and the housing crisis by the other.
Yeah, and tied to that, a pretty critical take on Canada's recent economic performance and the rising cost of living.
And finally, this perception of a pervasive, woke political climate that they see continuing under the new leader, Carney.
And we have to stress again, these are their interpretation. Very subjective, strong opinions, reflecting their clear dissatisfaction with the election and where they think Canada is headed.
Absolutely. It's not our place to endorse them, just to understand the perspective.
Exactly.
So listening to all this, it does make you think, doesn't it? What are the deeper currents driving these results and these anxieties? How much does media really shape our views?
And what about those generational divides? How do differing priorities between age groups really play out in politics? And what does that mean for a country's future long term?
Definitely some food for thought there. Things to maybe mull over after hearing these particular viewpoints.